Joining me now to discuss this issue further is Ken Good. He's an attorney on the board of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. Ken, welcome back to the program. First off, given this crisis we're in, do you support the governor's order on restricting jail releases?
Yes, ma'am, I do. I think the governor has tried to strike a middle road or a middle ground, or he's trying to find a middle ground, because you on the one hand, you're not arresting people, and so people are committing crimes and not getting arrested. And on the other hand, you have the use of PR bonds that are being set very low. And I think he's trying to strike a middle ground between public safety and for the public for crime and public safety for this pandemic.
The ongoing argument from bail reform advocates is those accused of the same crimes and with the same criminal history could still be released from jail if they have access to cash. So I guess to you, where's the public safety argument there?
I think the public safety argument flies into what is the factors that you're supposed to consider in setting bail. Do you have an extensive criminal history? I mean, the issue is, should we show mercy on someone and give them a PR bond? And I think our friends on the other side would say we should never measure, we should never make a distinction. And I think we've talked in the past about how you have large groups of people that you have to get through the jail very quickly, and you have to manage those numbers to get their cases resolved. And if you just release everybody without any supervision, then that is a recipe for disaster. We've seen that in New York. Even during the pandemic, they've rolled back many of their reforms because they were such a disaster. And I think the COVID-19 crisis has shown that result on steroids and made it very clear that that does not work, that creates chaos, and we have to find a better approach.
What about the discretion given to judges? I mean, one thing that the state Supreme Court did not address was the overarching questions of whether the order is unconstitutional or overreach by the governor. Instead, basically, they ruled that the county judges who brought the lawsuit were the wrong ones to challenge the order. What is the possibility that a new lawsuit on the same issue will be filed by, quote unquote, the proper plaintiffs?
I think the chances of that are pretty low because habeas corpus was filed at the Court of Criminal Appeals, which would have been by a proper plaintiff, and it was directly addressed the issue of whether the governor had the authority for his executive order, and the court denied it without even a written opinion. I think the order does not prevent anyone from getting out of jail. I think that is a misstatement. The courts are not able to award or give a PR bond, but they have many alternatives. There's been situations where they've just set bail at $50 if they're not eligible for a PR bond. The people that this is affect are people who have extensive criminal histories and criminal histories for violence. So this does not apply but to a limited set of people.
Do you think that there will be ramifications on the High Court's ruling even after the COVID-19 crisis has passed?
I think that the governor's executive order shows a recipe for bail reform that could be very effective in Texas, where certain classes of people who have extensive criminal histories or have shown in the past that they're not able to on their own show up for court, that they should not be eligible for PR bonds after we've already given them one or two or whatever. But we just don't need situations like in California where we have the record just set for a gentleman who was arrested the 7th time during the COVID crisis.
Given the current situation, you're kind of speaking to this right now, but what other ways would you suggest to deal with jail populations and the spread that we're seeing of COVID in jails?
Well, I think from my standpoint, I think there are effective ways to direct people away from the jail that doesn't involve a PR bond, which creates extensive problems going forward after the crisis, because that's going to have at least a 50% failure to appear rate, which is going to cause extensive backlogs of cases, even worse than they would be. And so if a county uses a bail schedule, if they just reduce that temporarily, or if they don't have a bail schedule, temporarily set up a bail schedule and say post a bond and you don't even have to go into the jail system. That would be a way to direct people away from the jail. They would be better off just saying, "Go, we release you. Go get a bond and bring it back in 3 days," and they'd be no worse situation than they are now if they don't show up.
What do you think about the future of the bail industry post COVID-19 and what we're seeing, in Texas, but across the nation?
Well, we've seen several states, Alaska and now New York, that have rolled back reforms, and because they decided they didn't work. The Vera Institute says that jurisdictions should expect a 40% failure to appear rate after any reform. They think that's acceptable. They don't realize that's a recipe for disaster. Courts will shut down, criminal justice systems will shut down. So I think that the future for bail is very bright, especially in light of the COVID-19, because we're going to have budget crises like you've never seen. And so we're going to have states across the country that cannot afford to implement these reforms, and the state pay for these services. They need to find ways to direct people who can afford to pay out of the system as quickly as possible, and then concentrate on the limited number of people that are left, because they're not going to have the money to do what our friends on the other side, the advocates, are going to push them to want to do.
Ken Good, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for coming on and sharing your views. We'll talk to you again soon on this issue.